Hello everybody out there in Facebook land. Mark Allan Gunnells here. I'm going to be doing a live reading of a story of mine. Last week, a week ago today actually on Halloween, Valhalla Books released their anthology, The Devil's Due, which contains 13 deal with the devil stories. Usually deals gone wrong, which is the way those stories usually go. Contains some very great and exciting authors. Also contains one of my stories, Genevieve and the Owl, and that is what I am going to be reading from today. Genevieve and the Owl is a story that didn't exist until Adam Messer, who runs Valhalla Books, actually contacted me about potentially writing a story for the anthology. We were on the phone and talked about it, and while we were talking about Deal with the Devil stories, I started to formulate this idea for what became Genevieve and the Owl. So I wanted to do something that was sort of a dark fairy tale, and I thought that would be fun for me as a writer. Maybe write in a certain cadence and language that I don't normally write in. And I thought it would, I could play with some of the tropes of the fairy tale and sort of play on them and sort of divert expectations from them. But I actually really enjoyed writing the story. It was the first thing I wrote after I finished a novella that took me about 2 months. Called When It Rains, and I went straight from that into Genevieve and the Owl, and I had a lot of fun writing it, and I hope that translates into fun for people who read it. It really is a solid collection. Adam worked very hard on it. He and his whole team at Valhalla Books and the other writers are all really great. And again, my story in the piece is a dark fairy tale called Genevieve and the Owl. And I'm going to read just a little bit of that starting right now. I hope you enjoy it. And while I'm on here, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll grab them when I'm done with my reading. Okay, Genevieve and the Owl. Genevieve wandered through the dark forest without the slightest trace of fear or hesitation. She had lived in these woods all 16 years of her life, and she knew them as well as she knew the contours of her own body. Even in the dark of night, approaching the witching hour, and far from any of the well-traversed paths, she walked with confidence. Besides, the forest, for all its reputation as a forbidding and dangerous place, felt safer to her than the home she shared with her stepfather and 3 stepbrothers. The moon was full and bloated in the sky above, but the branches overhead grew together so thick that only trickles of the milky light found their way down to her. The night held a chill to it, an early promise of the winter that would come in a few short months. Though the clothes she wore were threadbare, mended together with rags so many times that her dress resembled a patchwork quilt, the cold did not bother her. Neither did the dark. In truth, she felt more comfortable cloaked in the silky shadows of darkness. She may find a soft bed of fallen leaves at the base of one of the larger trees and pass the night there. Her stepfather would be angry if he woke in the morning to discover she wasn't at home, preparing breakfast for him and his sons, but he lived in a perpetual state of anger that seemed to never abate, but instead vacillate between differing degrees of severity. Her feet crackled through the dried leaves and brittle twigs that carpeted the forest floor, and she reached out to feel the rough bark beneath her fingers, as if the trees were covered in reptilian scales. Nearby, a small brook murmured over rocks, and the sound called to her like music. Added to this melody were the night sounds of creaking branches, rustling foliage, scurrying animals. Genevieve wished she could live out here in the wild, foraging for berries, fashioning crude animal traps for meat and fur, sleeping out in the open in the warm months and burrowing underground when the snows came. The nomadic existence of a hermit would suit her just fine. And she thought she could do it too, but her stepfather would come looking for her, hunting her as he did the game that called the forest home. He may be lacking in smarts, compassion, humor, and civility, but he was in fact an excellent tracker and hunter. As she made her way to the brook, she dropped to her knees and let her fingers trail in the cool water. Somewhere to her left, a frog gave a gaseous croak and splashed away. She let her head fall back, and she stared up at the slashes of night sky visible through the ceiling of intertwining branches. A few stars twinkled, and she briefly considered making a wish on them, as she had when she was small. Foolish, considering none of those childhood desires ever came true. Nearby she heard the gentle cooing of an owl asking its eternal question, "Who, who, who?" She scanned the area, and then an errant shaft of moonbeam illuminated the regal bird perched on a low branch of a grand oak. The creature's large eyes seemed to study her with inquisitiveness and intelligence. It hooted at her again. With a smile, Genevieve pursed her lips and returned the call. "Who? Who?" The owl surprised her by furthering the conversation. "Who are you?" She blinked and her mouth fell open as if her jaw had a broken hinge. At first she thought her ears were playing tricks on her, but then the owl repeated its question in a clear and firm voice, tilting its head quizzically at her. Had she fallen asleep? Was this a dream? Had she finally lost her mind, as her stepbrothers often called her addle-headed? Or was this something else entirely? Genevieve rose to her feet and slowly approached the owl. It did not fly away from the branch or even ruffle its feathers, merely watched her step closer. Her two oldest stepbrothers had often told her tales of people who had encountered talking animals in the forest, devils and demons taking on the guise of woodland creatures to tempt and ultimately destroy mere mortals. They whispered of conniving wolves and devious bears and goats that spoke in the sibilant hiss of snakes. She did not recall any mention of owls, but she didn't see why they should be excluded. Of course, she had always dismissed those tales as clumsy attempts from her stepbrothers to frighten her, so that she would spend less time in the forest and more time at home doing their washing. Now she wasn't so sure. "Did you say something to me?" she asked when she was a mere foot from the tree. The owl blinked, turned its head one way then the other as if surveying the area, and said, "I don't see anyone else here." Genevieve took another tentative step forward. She knew that most people would be afraid, would run away, but she wasn't, and she didn't. She would exercise caution, but her natural curiosity demanded satiation. "Are you a devil?" she asked. The owl seemed to consider this for a moment. "We all have a little devil inside of us, wouldn't you agree? Some have called me devil, some have called me savior. What of you? What are you called?" "Genevieve." "Eve to your friends?" She shook her head. "I have no friends to speak of." "Pity." Genevieve smiled, thinking she knew this bird's game. "Are you offering to be my friend?" "Nothing of the sort," the owl said, flapping its short wings as if taking umbrage at the thought. "My relationships tend to be strictly business, transactional in nature." She waited for the owl to go on, and when it didn't, she took the bait. "Meaning?" "I have within my power to grant you 3 wishes, anything your heart desires. In exchange, you will provide something to me." She found herself thinking again of the empty promises she'd wasted on constellations as a child, but something told her this was different. Small as the owl was, she sensed great power emanating from it. "An exchange," she said. "Shall I suppose that you want my soul?" "Oh no. As a currency, souls are fairly worthless, actually. Still, valueless as they are, people are surprisingly reluctant to part with their souls, even when faced with the opportunity to make all their dreams come true. No, what I trade in are lives." "You want my life?" The owl answered with bemused humor. "Not yours, my dear. I want the life of your firstborn child." "And what if I never bear a child?" "That won't be a problem. In fact, you carry the gestating seed even now." Genevieve splayed a hand across her belly. She had suspected this, but had not been sure. "For what purpose do you want this child?" "That is of no concern of yours. Are you prepared to care for the child yourself?" The answer, of course, was no. She gave the matter another moment of thought, though truthfully her decision had already been made. "Must I make all my wishes now?" she asked finally. "No. Take one of my feathers, and every time you want to make a wish, simply hold it in your hand and speak your desire aloud." The owl flapped its wings again, and this time a single brown feather detached, floated through the air on a non-existent breeze, and landed gently in Genevieve's outstretched palm. "How do we seal the pact?" she said. "Blood?" The owl shook its head. "Nothing so gruesome. When you make your first wish, the pact will be established, and is therefore binding." And that's just a little bit from the beginning. You would have to buy the anthology and read the story to find out what her 3 wishes are and what ramifications they have. Might actually surprise you. But again, I had a lot of fun writing that story, particularly trying to give it that feel of a old-time fairy tale with my own twist on it. And again, this anthology, which is called The Devil's Due, it has been out this past week from Valhalla Books. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it from Amazon either in paperback or as an ebook. Some great stories in there. Hopefully you will enjoy them. Hopefully you enjoyed that story. And check it out. And check out Valhalla Books. They have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. I'm actually going to be publishing my Haunted Apartment novel 2B with them sometime next year. And thank you for stopping by.